When 17-year-old Madison Cross stepped into Blackwood Preparatory Academy for the first time, she had no idea that her mother's job cleaning the mansion of tech mogul Victor Steinberg would put her directly in the crosshairs of his spoiled heir. What started as cruel pranks and public humiliation would spiral into something far more sinister. But Madison wasn't just any maid's daughter. She carried secrets that would eventually cost Camden Steinberg his entire $2 billion inheritance. This is the story of how one girl's brilliant response to relentless bullying brought down the most powerful family in Silicon Valley. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Madison Cross pressed her worn leather backpack against her chest as the black sedan pulled through the iron gates of Blackwood Preparatory Academy. The pristine campus sprawled before her like something from a magazine. Manicured lawns, covered buildings, and students who looked like they'd stepped out of fashion shoots. Her mother, Elena, squeezed her shoulder from the passenger seat. "Remember what we talked about, Mia?" Elena whispered. "Keep your head down. Focus on your studies. This scholarship is everything." The driver, Mr. Patterson from the Steinberg household, glanced in the rearview mirror. "Don't worry, Mrs. Cross. Madison's going to do just fine. Smart girl like her? She'll fit right in." But as Madison stepped out onto the cobblestone walkway, she felt the weight of every designer handbag and luxury watch around her. Her thrift store blazer and scuffed shoes marked her as an outsider before she'd even spoken a word. The academic scholarship to Blackwood was unprecedented, a full ride based purely on merit, funded by the school's wealthiest benefactor. What Madison didn't know was that Victor Steinberg had specifically requested that his family's housekeeper's daughter receive this opportunity. It was meant to be a generous gesture, a way to give back to the woman who had worked tirelessly for his family for over a decade. Elena Cross had started working for the Steinbergs when Camden was just 7 years old. She'd watched him grow from a curious, if demanding child into something harder to recognize. The transformation had been gradual year, bringing more entitlement, more cruelty, more distance from any sense of consequence. Victor was always traveling, building his tech empire, while his wife Vivian floated through charity galas and spa appointments. Camden learned early that money could solve any problem and buy any silence. Madison's first day began smoothly enough. Her teachers were impressed with her preparation and insight. In advanced literature, she offered perspectives on Gatsby that made even the professor pause thoughtfully. In calculus, she solved problems that stumped students who'd had private tutors since kindergarten. Word spread quickly through the small senior class the scholarship girl was brilliant. It was during lunch that Camden Steinberg first noticed her. He sat at the center table in the dining hall, surrounded by his usual crowd of admirers. Blake Morrison, whose family owned half of downtown's commercial real estate. Sophia Chen, daughter of a pharmaceutical heiress. Marcus Webb, son of a federal judge. They were the untouchables of Blackwood, and Camden was their undisputed king. "Who's the girl in the corner?" Camden asked, nodding toward Madison. "Who sat alone with a worn paperback novel and a simple sandwich from home?" "Oh, that's the charity case," Sophia replied with a laugh. "Madison something. Full scholarship. Can you imagine? They're letting anyone in here now." Camden studied Madison more carefully. Something about her seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the basic uniform without any of the expensive accessories that marked status at Blackwood. She was pretty in an understated way. But what struck him most was how completely she ignored the social dynamics swirling around her. She read her book as if the most exclusive preparatory school in the state was just another library. "I think I know her from somewhere," Camden mused. Blake leaned forward conspiratorially. "Maybe your family's country club. Some of the staff bring their kids around during summer events." The comment triggered something in Camden's memory. Summer barbecues at the estate. His mother complaining about having to watch her tone because the help's daughter was playing in the garden. The woman who cleaned their house, Selena something? The realization hit him like a cold wave. This wasn't just any scholarship student. This was the maid's daughter, sitting in his school, probably gossiping to her mother about everything she observed. The thought that his family's domestic help had been watching him, judging him, reporting back to their daughter, made his skin crawl. After lunch, Camden made his move. He approached Madison at her locker with his signature, smile the one that had charmed teachers into overlooking missed assignments and convinced administrators to forget about disciplinary issues. Madison, right? I'm Camden Steinberg. I think our families know each other. Madison looked up from organizing her textbooks. Up close, she was even prettier than he'd realized, with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to see straight through him. I know who you are, she said simply. Great. Then you know I basically run things around here. I was thinking we should be friends. I could show you around, introduce you to people who matter. Madison closed her locker and shouldered her backpack. That's not necessary. But thank you. She started to walk away, and Camden felt something he wasn't used to: dismissal. Students at Blackwood didn't walk away from him. Even the teachers treated him with a deference born of knowing exactly how much money his family donated annually. Hey, wait up, he called, catching up to her. Look, I'm trying to be nice here. You do realize who my father is, right? The scholarship you're on? That's his money. Madison stopped and turned to face him fully. When she spoke, her voice was calm but firm. I'm aware of where the funding comes from. I'm also aware that scholarships are awarded based on merit, not as personal favors. I earned my place here the same way anyone else would, through my grades and my work. The quiet confidence in her voice rattled. Camden, more than outright defiance, would have. She wasn't intimidated by him, wasn't impressed by his family's wealth, and didn't seem to understand that her entire future could depend on staying in his good graces. That's a cute perspective, Camden said, his friendly mask slipping slightly. But let's be real here. Your mom cleans our toilets. You're here because my family felt sorry for you. The least you could do is show some gratitude. For the first time, Madison's composure cracked slightly. A flash of anger crossed her features before she regained control. My mother works hard for everything she has. She's taught me that respect is earned, not bought. Maybe that's a lesson you should consider. She turned and walked toward her next class, leaving Camden standing in the hallway with a growing crowd of students pretending not to stare. He felt heat rise in his cheeks, not embarrassment but fury. No one had ever spoken to him like that, especially not someone whose family depended on his family's generosity. Blake appeared at his elbow. Having witnessed the entire exchange, Dude, did the maid's daughter just lecture you about respect? Camden's jaw tightened. This isn't over. That afternoon, Camden sat in his father's study at the Steinberg mansion, a palatial estate in the hills overlooking Silicon Valley. Victor was, as usual, on a conference call with investors in Tokyo. But Camden had learned patience when it came to getting what he wanted. When Victor finally hung up, Camden made his case carefully. Dad, I think there might be a problem with that scholarship student you sponsored. Victor looked up from his laptop. Despite being worth over $2 billion, he maintained the focused intensity that had built his empire. Madison Cross? What kind of problem? She's causing drama at school, making other students uncomfortable. I think the culture shock might be too much for someone from her background. Victor frowned. Elena's daughter? That doesn't sound right. Elena's one of the most professional people we employ. Her daughter's academic record was exceptional. Camden had anticipated this response. I'm not questioning her intelligence, Dad, but intelligence and social adaptability are different things. She seems resentful, like she has a chip on her shoulder about wealthy families. It's making things awkward for everyone. The conversation was interrupted by Elena herself, who knocked softly on the study door. Mr. Steinberg, I'm sorry to disturb you, but I wanted to thank you again for Madison's opportunity. She called me this afternoon. She's so excited about her classes. Victor smiled warmly. Elena, please, come in. Camden was just telling me how Madison is settling in. Elena beamed with pride. She said the library is incredible, and her literature teacher wants her to consider early admission to several universities. I can't thank you enough for believing in her. Camden watched his father's expression soften as he looked at Elena. Victor had always treated their household staff with unusual respect, much to Camden's irritation. He saw it as a weakness. A billionaire shouldn't concern himself with the feelings of people he employed. Madison earned that scholarship entirely on her own merit, Victor said firmly. Glancing meaningfully at Camden, she's exactly the kind of student Blackwood should be proud to have. After Alina left, Camden tried a different approach. I'm just saying, Dad. Maybe we should keep an eye on the situation. Make sure the other families don't start feeling like their donations are being overshadowed by charity cases. Victor's eyes narrowed. Camden, that young woman's test scores were higher than yours. Her essay was more insightful than most college applications I've read. If anyone at that school has a problem with merit-based achievement, that says more about them than it does about her. Camden left his father's study with a new understanding. This wasn't going to be solved through family influence. If he wanted to put Madison Cross in her place, he'd have to handle it himself. And at Blackwood Preparatory Academy, Camden Steinberg had never met a problem he couldn't solve through the careful application of social pressure and strategic cruelty. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The real game was just beginning. The next morning, Madison arrived at Blackwood to find her locker vandalized. Someone had scratched Charity Case into the metal door and stuffed it with crumpled fast food wrappers. Students walking past either stared openly or quickly looked away, depending on their nerve level. Camden watched from across the hallway. Leaning against Blake Morrison's locker with studied casualness, he'd started earlier. 6 a.m. text to his inner circle had set the tone for Madison's second day at Blackwood. Looks like someone got a reality check, Sophia. Chen commented loud enough for Madison to hear. Madison methodically removed the trash from her locker without acknowledging the audience. Her hands remained steady as she organized her books. But Camden noticed the tight set of her jaw. Good. She was feeling the pressure. In first period chemistry, Professor Williams paired students for lab work. Camden had already arranged this in advance, a generous donation to the science department's equipment fund had earned him some influence over classroom logistics. Madison. You'll be working with Camden, Professor Williams announced. I think you'll find his enthusiasm for chemical reactions quite explosive. The class chuckled at what they assumed was a joke about Camden's notorious party reputation. Only Camden and Madison caught the underlying tension. As they set up their station, Camden kept his voice low and friendly. Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. Why don't we start over? Madison measured out precise amounts of sodium hydroxide. We didn't get off on any foot. You made assumptions about me. I corrected them. That's not a relationship. It's a transaction. Her clinical tone irritated Camden more than anger would have. She was treating him like a specimen to be studied rather than the most influential student at Blackwood. You know what your problem is? Camden said, pretending to check their calculations. You think being smart makes you special? But intelligence is just another commodity, and commodities can be replaced. Madison finally looked at him directly. Is that supposed to be a threat? It's market analysis. Their experiment required heating a solution over a Bunsen burner. As Madison reached for the flame adjustment, Camden accidentally bumped her elbow. The beaker tilted dangerously, and hot liquid splashed across the lab bench, missing Madison's hand by inches. Whoa, careful there, Camden said loudly. Maybe lab work isn't your strong suit. Professor Williams hurried over to assess the spill. What happened here? Madison seemed a little nervous. Camden explained with perfect concern. First time working with professional equipment, I guess? No harm done, though. Madison said nothing. But Camden saw her hands clench briefly before she reached for paper towels to clean up the mess. The incident looked like amateur clumsiness to anyone watching, but they both knew better. By lunch, word had spread that the scholarship student couldn't handle basic lab work. The story grew in the telling by the time it reached the dining hall. Madison had supposedly nearly set the chemistry lab on fire. Camden had learned early that social destruction was an art form. You didn't attack someone directly, that was crude and left fingerprints. Instead, you created an environment where the victim's destruction seemed natural, even inevitable, over the following week. That environment took shape with surgical precision. Madison's textbooks disappeared from her locker, forcing her to share with classmates who made their reluctance obvious. Her scholarship was mentioned in every introduction, as if it were her last name. Teachers began calling on her more frequently, not to showcase her intelligence, but to create pressure situations where any mistake would be magnified. The psychological campaign was more sophisticated than typical teenage bullying. Camden had resources most high schoolers couldn't imagine. His allowance exceeded the annual salary of many families and his parents. Connections reached into every corner of society that mattered. He started with Madison's college prospects, a few carefully placed phone calls from family friends, raised concerns about Madison's attitude with admissions officers at several universities. Nothing actionable, nothing traceable, just enough doubt to ensure her applications would receive extra scrutiny. Then he moved to her mother's employment. Alina had been scheduled to receive a raise after 10 years of exemplary service. But suddenly there were budget considerations that required review. Victor Steinberg never knew about these conversations. Camden had learned to work through the household manager and administrative staff who handled day-to-day operations. Madison noticed that changes but couldn't prove their source. Her mother came home stressed about unexpected performance reviews. College counselors who had previously been encouraging began suggesting backup options and realistic expectations. The brilliance of Camden's approach was its subtlety. To outside observers, Madison simply seemed to be struggling with the transition to Blackwood's demanding environment. Her grades remained perfect, but her social isolation became more apparent daily. Camden's inner circle played their roles flawlessly. Blake accidentally spilled coffee on Madison's presentation notes minutes before her speech in government class. Sophia started rumors about Madison receiving special treatment from male teachers. Marcus Webb, whose father was a federal judge, began casually mentioning how scholarship fraud was becoming a serious legal issue. The stress began showing in subtle ways. Madison started arriving at school earlier and leaving later, trying to avoid the social gauntlet of regular hours. She ate lunch in the library, rather than face the dining hall dynamics. Her responses in class became more cautious, as if she were second-guessing herself. But Camden underestimated what he was dealing with. Madison Cross had not arrived at Blackwood Preparatory Academy by accident. Her scholarship application had included a personal essay that even the admissions committee found remarkable. She had written about growing up in a household where her mother cleaned other people's homes by day and studied for her GED by night. About learning calculus from library books while other kids played video games. About understanding from an early age that she would have to be twice as good to get half as much. The pressure Camden thought would break her was nothing compared to what she had already survived. More importantly, Madison had been studying Camden Steinberg long before he noticed her. During the years her mother worked at the Steinberg mansion, Madison had observed the family dynamics with the analytical mind that had earned her perfect test scores. She understood that Camden's cruelty wasn't random, it was learned behavior, reinforced by a system that had never taught him consequences, while Camden orchestrated his campaign of social destruction. Madison was conducting her own investigation. She used her library access to research the Steinberg family business structure. She learned about Victor's philanthropic foundations, his public statements about education and opportunity, his reputation as a progressive tech leader who valued merit over privilege. Most interesting of all, she discovered that Camden's inheritance wasn't simply guaranteed. Victor Steinberg had structured his will with specific behavioral clauses, reflecting his belief that wealth should be earned through character as much as birthright. Camden would inherit the family fortune only if he met certain criteria related to education, community service, and what the legal documents termed moral fitness. Madison also learned about the other potential heirs. Victor's younger brother had children who would inherit if Camden was deemed unworthy. The family foundation's board included independent members who took their oversight responsibilities seriously. There were mechanisms in place to ensure the Steinberg legacy aligned with Victor's values. Camden had no idea how precarious his position actually was. His father's wealth had insulated him from consequences for so long that he couldn't imagine a world where his behavior might actually cost him anything meaningful. As Madison gathered information, she began to form a plan that went far beyond simply surviving Camden's bullying. She realized she had an opportunity to teach him the kind of lesson that money couldn't buy and privilege couldn't erase. The confrontation Camden was orchestrating would indeed cost him his inheritance, but not in any way he could predict or prepare for. Madison Cross was about to demonstrate that intelligence, properly applied, was far more dangerous than wealth carelessly wielded. The real war was just beginning, and Camden had no idea he was already losing. Camden's declaration of war began with digital warfare. Within hours of the academic competition, anonymous accounts appeared on social media platforms popular with Blackwood students. Photos of Madison's modest apartment building surfaced, taken from public records and tagged with mocking captions about scholarship housing. Screenshots of her mother's employment history appeared with commentary about knowing your place. The attacks were sophisticated enough to avoid direct attribution to Camden, but his fingerprints were everywhere. The timing, the specific information accessed, the coordinated nature of the post said, all pointed back to someone with resources and connections. Madison discovered the campaign on a Thursday evening while researching for her AP history essay. Her phone buzzed with notifications as classmates began forwarding her the posts. Each image felt like a violation. Each comment, a deliberate attempt to strip away her dignity, but Camden had underestimated his target. Madison didn't break down or retreat. Instead, she did something that caught him completely off guard. She documented everything. Screenshots, timestamps, metadata analysis using free tools she'd learned about in computer science class. She built a comprehensive record of the harassment with methodical precision at school the next day. Madison approached Principal Henderson's office during lunch. Dr. Henderson was a former prosecutor who transitioned to education, bringing with her a sharp eye for evidence and a low tolerance for wealthy students who thought money bought immunity. "I need to report a pattern of cyberbullying and harassment," Madison said, placing a meticulously organized folder on the principal's desk. Dr. Henderson opened the folder and found herself looking at a case file that would have impressed law enforcement. Madison had traced IP addresses using public tools, documented the timing correlations between real-world events and online attacks, even identified common linguistic patterns that suggested coordinated authorship. "This is extremely thorough work, Madison. Have you considered law enforcement as a career path?" Dr. Henderson asked, genuinely impressed. "Actually, I'm thinking about cybersecurity," Madison replied. "But right now, I just want to make sure this behavior doesn't escalate further." Dr. Henderson studied the evidence more carefully. The posts never mentioned Camden Steinberg directly, but the circumstantial case was overwhelming. The digital breadcrumbs led back to accounts created from IP addresses registered to locations frequented by Blackwood's wealthy students' country clubs, private residences in exclusive neighborhoods, even the Steinberg family estate. "I'll need to investigate this formally," Dr. Henderson said. "But I want you to know that Blackwood has a zero-tolerance policy for harassment in any form. Wealth and family connections don't provide exemptions from our conduct standards." That afternoon, Camden was called to the principal's office. He arrived with his characteristic confidence, assuming this was some minor administrative matter. His demeanor changed rapidly as Dr. Henderson laid out the evidence. "I'm not accusing you directly," Dr. Henderson said carefully, "but this pattern of harassment coincides with several incidents involving you and Miss Cross. I need to ask, do you have any knowledge of these social media attacks?" Camden had learned from his father that when faced with accusations, deny everything and demand proof of intent. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Dr. Henderson. I'd barely use social media." "Are you seriously suggesting I'm responsible for random internet trolls?" "I'm suggesting that someone with access to specific information about Miss Cross and her family has been orchestrating a harassment campaign. Someone who understands Blackwood's social dynamics well enough to craft attacks designed for maximum impact on our student body." Camden's preparation served him well. He maintained his innocence with convincing sincerity, pointing out that the evidence was circumstantial at best. Dr. Henderson found herself in a familiar position, knowing something was wrong but unable to prove it beyond the school's burden of evidence. But she wasn't finished. Camden, I'm going to be very clear with you. Miss Cross has documented every aspect of this harassment. If anything like this continues, if she experiences any retaliation for reporting these incidents, I will assume malicious intent, regardless of what I can prove. Do you understand me? Camden understood perfectly. He was being warned off, told to back down and find other targets for his frustrations. For most students, that warning would have been sufficient. But Camden Steinberg had never been told he couldn't have something he wanted. What he wanted was for Madison Cross to disappear from his world entirely. He left Dr. Henderson's office with a new strategy. If digital attacks were traceable, he'd have to get more creative. Physical intimidation was too risky and too crude. But psychological warfare that required finesse, and Camden had learned from masters of corporate manipulation. His opportunity came through an unexpected source: college applications. As seniors at Blackwood, students were deep into the process of applying to elite universities. Camden learned through carefully placed questions that Madison was applying to several Ivy League schools. With MIT as her top choice for their cybersecurity program, Camden's father had connections throughout higher education board positions, major donations, alumni networking that spanned decades. Victor Steinberg could make a single phone call and guarantee Camden's acceptance to virtually any university in the country. But those same connections could work in reverse. Camden spent a weekend researching Madison's application strategy. He identified her target schools, researched their admissions officers, and began crafting a plan that would destroy her academic future before it could begin. His approach was subtle and devastating. Camden reached out to Blackwood alumni working in admissions at Madison's target schools, not as Camden Steinberg seeking favors, but as a concerned classmate reporting potential fraud. He suggested that Madison's achievements seemed inconsistent with her background, that her test scores raised questions about academic integrity, that her recommendations might be inflated due to political correctness surrounding scholarship. Students, the allegations were always presented as reluctant concerns rather than accusations. Camden positioned himself as someone who admired Madison's determination, but worried that she might be in over her head, struggling with the pressure to maintain her scholarship through any means necessary. Meanwhile, at school, Camden launched a different kind of psychological campaign. He began spreading rumors about Madison's college prospects, suggesting that she was being considered for schools far beyond her actual capabilities. The implication was clear: admissions officers were lowering standards for diversity purposes, not recognizing genuine achievement. "I heard she's applying to Harvard," Camden would say with feigned concern. "I hope she's not setting herself up for disappointment." The transition from Blackwood to that level of competition can be brutal if you're not really prepared. The comments seemed supportive on the surface, but carried darker implications. They suggested that Madison's success at Blackwood was somehow artificial, that she'd struggle in genuine academic competition, that her achievements were products of lowered expectations rather than genuine ability. Madison began noticing the change in atmosphere around her college applications. Teachers, who had previously been enthusiastic about her prospects, started offering more cautious encouragement. Classmates asked probing questions about her backup plans. The confidence she'd built through months of academic success started eroding under constant, subtle questioning. The breaking point came during a college counseling session. Mrs. Patterson, Blackwood's college advisor, called Madison into her office for what should have been a routine check-in about application deadlines. "Madison, I've been thinking about your college list," Mrs. Patterson began carefully. "Have you considered adding some more safety schools? Sometimes students with your background find the transition to highly competitive environments more challenging than they anticipate." Madison felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What do you mean by students with my background?" Mrs. Patterson looked uncomfortable. "I just mean that the academic culture at places like MIT can be very intense, very competitive. Students who are used to being the smartest person in the room sometimes struggle when everyone around them has had similar advantages." The coded language was clear. Madison was being warned that she might not belong at elite institutions, that her success at Blackwood might not translate to genuine competitiveness. It was exactly the message Camden had been crafting and spreading for weeks. Are you suggesting I'm not qualified for the schools on my list? Madison asked directly. Of course not, Mrs. Patterson replied quickly. I'm just encouraging realistic expectations. Maybe consider some excellent state schools or smaller liberal arts colleges where you'd have more support resources. Madison left the meeting with a new understanding of what she was facing. This wasn't just bullying anymore, this was sabotage. Someone was systematically undermining her academic future, using connections and influence she couldn't match or counter. That evening, Madison sat in her bedroom surrounded by college brochures and application materials. For the first time since arriving at Blackwood, she felt truly defeated. The attacks on her dignity she could withstand. The social exclusion she could ignore. But this assault on her future felt insurmountable. Her mother found her there hours later, staring at her laptop screen with tears of frustration in her eyes. What's wrong, Mia? Alina asked, settling beside her daughter on the narrow bed. Madison explained everything: the escalating harassment, the principal's warning, the subtle campaign against her college prospects. Alina listened with growing anger, recognizing the sophisticated cruelty that only came from entitled privilege. You know what your problem is? Alina said when Madison finished. You're fighting fair against someone who isn't. You're trying to win through merit and hard work. But he's using weapons you don't have access to. Madison looked at her mother. Confused, Alina smiled, but there was something sharp in her expression. You think I've just been cleaning houses for 20 years? You think I don't see things, hear things, learn things about the families I work for? For the first time, Madison realized that her mother might be more than just a victim of circumstance. Alina Cross had been observing the wealthy elite from inside their homes. Privy to their private conversations and personal secrets for 2 decades, Camden Steinberg wants to play games? Alina continued. Then maybe it's time he learned what happens when you underestimate the help. Madison stared at her mother. Understanding it was dawning slowly. The real battle was just beginning. And Camden had no idea what forces he'd set in motion. Alina Cross had been invisible for so long that the wealthy families she served had forgotten she possessed ears, eyes, and a sharp memory. 20 years of cleaning the most exclusive homes in Silicon Valley had given her access to secrets that could topple empires, destroy political careers, and shatter carefully constructed public images. She began her revelation to Madison with the Steinberg family's darkest secret one, that Victor himself had tried to bury for over a decade. Your friend Camden thinks he's untouchable because of his father's money, Alina said, settling into the worn armchair in their small living room. But money built on fraud has a way of disappearing very quickly. Madison looked up from her laptop, where she'd been reviewing her college application essays. What do you mean, fraud? Alina pulled out a small notebook, one of several she'd kept over the years, documenting overheard conversations and observed behaviors. The habit had started as a form of protection, a way to defend herself if she was ever falsely accused of theft or misconduct. Over time, it had become something more valuable than she'd ever imagined. Victor Steinberg's first big break came from a software acquisition. 12 years ago, Alina explained, a small startup called Neuralink Dynamics had developed revolutionary artificial intelligence algorithms. Victor bought the company for $50 million, then launched Technocore Industries using their technology. That AI became the foundation of his entire empire. Madison nodded, familiar with the basic story from business magazines and Camden's own boasting. Technocore was Victor's crown jewel, a company that had transformed him from a millionaire to a billionaire almost overnight. What those magazines don't know, Alina continued, is that Victor never actually bought the technology legally. The 3 founders of Neuralink Dynamics died in a car accident 2 weeks before the acquisition was supposed to close. Victor convinced their grieving families to sell quickly, claiming the company would collapse without proper leadership. Alina flipped through her notebook, finding the specific entry she needed. I was cleaning Victor's study the night after the accident. He was on a conference call with his lawyers, laughing about how convenient the timing was. Said something about dead men can't challenge patents, and how the Families were too emotional to read the acquisition documents carefully. Madison felt a chill run down her spine. Are you saying he had something to do with the accident? I'm saying he knew about it before it was reported in the news, Alina replied grimly. And I'm saying the acquisition papers were already drawn up and ready to sign. Dated 3 days before the crash happened, she handed Madison several photocopied documents pages. Alina had carefully copied over the years when cleaning Victor's private office. Patent filings, acquisition agreements, insurance claims, all with suspicious timing and inconsistencies that suggested premeditation rather than opportunistic tragedy. But there's more, Alina continued. The families who sold Neuralink thought they were getting $50 million. What they actually got was shares in a shell company that Victor dissolved 6 months later. The real technology was transferred to Technocore for free, and the families ended up with worthless paper. Madison studied the documents with growing amazement. Her mother had assembled evidence of securities fraud, patent theft, and potentially something much worse. Why didn't you ever report this? Alina laughed bitterly. Report it to who? Victor Steinberg donates millions to political campaigns, sits on university boards, employs half the lawyers in the state. You'd think anyone would believe the word of a housekeeper over his. But Alina wasn't finished. The Steinberg family's corruption ran deeper than financial crimes. She told Madison about Camden's academic record, which was far different from what Blackwood's official transcripts showed. Camden has never earned a grade above C+ in his life, Alina revealed. I've cleaned his room after parent-teacher conferences for years. Every semester, Victor writes donation checks too. Blackwood that mysteriously correspond with Camden's. Improved report cards. She showed Madison photos she'd discreetly taken of Camden's actual test papers and homework assignments work that revealed a student struggling with basic concepts, making elementary mistakes, clearly unprepared for university-level education. The SAT scores Camden claims. Completely fabricated. Victor hired a testing service to take the exam under Camden's name. Cost him $200,000. But Camden's official score is 1580. His real score. From a practice test one found in his trash was 980. Madison felt pieces clicking into place. Camden's arrogance about academic competition, his confidence in attacking her achievements, his certainty that he deserved admission to elite universities, was all built on completely fraudulent foundations. But here's the most important thing, Alina said, pulling out a different notebook. Victor has been planning to transfer the family fortune to an offshore trust on Camden's 18th birthday. $2 billion. Moved to accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. To avoid estate taxes and potential lawsuits, she showed Madison financial documents that detailed the elaborate tax avoidance scheme. The transfer is scheduled for next month, right after Camden's birthday. Once that money leaves the country, it becomes much harder for authorities to recover. Even if Victor's crimes are eventually exposed, Madison stared at the evidence spread across their coffee table. Her mother had assembled a case that could destroy the Steinberg family's empire and send Victor to prison for decades. But she'd also revealed something else: Camden's inheritance was about to become untouchable. Why are you showing me this now? Madison asked. Alina's expression hardened. Because your college applications are due next week, and I've been watching what that boy is doing to your future. He thinks he can destroy your life because his family has money and power. But money stolen through fraud isn't power, it's vulnerability. Madison began to understand the scope of what her mother was offering. This wasn't just evidence of criminal behavior, it was the nuclear option. The information that could obliterate Camden's family completely. What exactly are you suggesting? Madison asked carefully. I'm suggesting that Camden Steinberg needs to understand the consequences of attacking someone who has nothing left to lose, Alina replied. You can't fight his money and connections directly, but you can make sure he loses everything he's using to hurt you. Over the next 3 days, Madison and Alina refined their strategy. They couldn't simply hand the evidence to authorities. Victor's political connections would likely suppress any investigation until after the offshore transfer was complete. They needed to create undeniable public pressure that would force immediate action. Madison's approach was characteristically methodical. She researched investigative journalists who specialized in corporate fraud, identified whistleblower protection programs, and studied successful cases where powerful figures had been brought down by determined individuals with compelling evidence. Meanwhile, Elena used her access to the Steinberg household to gather additional documentation. She photographed financial records, copied correspondence with offshore banking partners, and documented Victor's communication with the testing services that had falsified Camden's academic credentials. The plan they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Madison would submit her evidence to 3 different investigative teams, simultaneously: a major newspaper's financial crimes unit, the FBI's white-collar crime division, and the Securities and Exchange Commission's fraud department. The coordinated revelation would prevent Victor from using his influence to suppress any single investigation, but timing was crucial. The exposure had to happen before Camden's 18th birthday and the offshore transfer. But after his college applications were submitted, Madison wanted to make sure Camden experienced the full scope of consequences for his actions as the plan took shape. Madison felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving at Blackwood: genuine power. Not the artificial authority that came from wealth or connections, but the real strength that came from truth and evidence. Camden Steinberg had spent months trying to convince everyone that Madison didn't belong in his world. He was about to discover that he was right. She belonged in a much more dangerous place. She belonged in the world of people who couldn't be bought, intimidated, or silenced. The world of people who fought back. On Friday afternoon, Madison sat in the Blackwood Library, making final revisions to her MIT application essay. The topic was overcoming adversity, and she found herself writing with a clarity and purpose she'd never achieved before. Some challenges are designed to break you, she wrote. Others are designed to reveal who you really are when everything else is stripped away. The question isn't whether you can survive adversity, it's whether you can maintain your integrity while fighting back against those who created it unnecessarily. She submitted her applications that evening, knowing they represented her genuine achievements rather than manufactured credentials. Whatever happened with her college prospects, she would succeed or fail based on her own merit. Camden's fate, however, was about to depend on something entirely different. Justice had been patient for 12 years, but it was finally coming for the Steinberg family, and Madison Cross was going to be the one to deliver. Camden's 18th birthday was scheduled for November 15th, exactly 1 week after early admission college applications were due. Victor had planned the timing carefully. Camden would submit his applications with fraudulent credentials, turn 18 and gain legal access to the offshore trust, then begin his freshman year at an elite university as one of the wealthiest teenagers in America. Madison chose November 10th as her strike date. She began her attack at 6 a.m. Pacific time. When East Coast newsrooms were already deep into their morning editorial meetings, her first call went to Sarah Chen, an investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal who specialized in Silicon Valley corruption cases. Ms. Chen, my name is Madison Cross, and I have evidence of a multi-billion-dollar fraud involving Technocore Industries and its founder, Victor Steinberg. Sarah Chen had received hundreds of similar calls over her career. Most were from disgruntled employees or conspiracy theorists with theories but no evidence. Something in Madison's voice, however, made her listen more carefully. What kind of evidence are we talking about, Madison? Documentation proving that Mr. Steinberg's entire fortune is built on stolen intellectual property and securities fraud, patent theft, insurance fraud, academic fraud for his son, and a planned $2 billion offshore transfer to avoid prosecution. Chen sat up straighter. Can you prove these allegations? I can prove all of them. Financial records, legal documents, photographic evidence, recorded conversations, everything you'd need for a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation. Within an hour, Madison was sitting in a secure video conference with Chen and her editor, walking them through Elena's meticulously assembled evidence. The journalist's expression shifted from skepticism to amazement as Madison presented documents that would have taken them months to obtain through traditional investigative methods. "How did you acquire these materials?" Chen asked carefully, aware of the legal implications. "My mother has worked as a housekeeper for the Steinberg family for over a decade. Everything she collected was in plain sight, photographed or copied during the course of her legitimate employment duties. There are no privacy violations or illegal surveillance issues." By noon, the Wall Street Journal's legal team had verified the authenticity of key documents and confirmed that Elena's methods of collection were legally sound. Chen's editor authorized a full investigative team to pursue the story with priority scheduling. But Madison wasn't finished. At 1 p.m., she submitted a formal complaint to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, accompanied by the same evidence package. At 2 p.m., she filed a whistleblower report with the Securities and Exchange Commission. At 3 p.m., she placed one final call, this one to Victor Steinberg's office. "Mr. Steinberg, this is Madison Cross. I believe you know who I am." Victor's assistant had put the call through because the Cross name was familiar. His housekeeper's daughter, probably calling about some school function or scholarship matter. Victor picked up the line with distracted politeness. "Madison, hello. Is everything all right? Is your mother okay?" "My mother is fine, Mr. Steinberg. I'm calling to inform you that I've submitted evidence of your criminal activities to federal authorities and major news organizations. You have approximately 2 hours before the story breaks publicly." The line went silent for a long moment. When Victor spoke again, his voice had changed completely. "I think there's been some misunderstanding, Madison. Perhaps we should meet to discuss whatever concerns you might have." "There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Steinberg. I have documented evidence of your theft of Neuralink Dynamics technology, your defrauding of the founders' families, your son's academic fraud, and your planned offshore asset transfer. The FBI will be seeking warrants within hours." Victor's mind raced through implications and potential responses. His first instinct was to threaten Madison directly, but something in her tone warned him against that approach. This wasn't a naive teenager he could intimidate. This was someone who had already set his forces in motion beyond his ability to stop. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "I want Camden to understand that actions have consequences," Madison replied. "I want him to experience what it feels like when someone with power decides to destroy your future for entertainment. Madison, you don't understand the complexity of business transactions. Things that might look questionable to an outsider often have perfectly legitimate explanations, Mr. Steinberg." Madison interrupted. "I've documented 12 years of criminal activity. This isn't about business complexity. This is about systematic fraud, theft, and possibly murder. The authorities will determine which laws you've broken and what penalties you'll face." Victor felt real fear for the first time in decades. The offshore transfer was scheduled for Camden's birthday just 5 days away. If federal authorities froze his assets before then, the money would become evidence in criminal proceedings, potentially tied up for years. "Listen to me very carefully," Victor said, his voice taking on the hardness that had built his empire. "You're making a mistake that will destroy more than just my family. Your mother will never work again. You'll never attend college anywhere. I have connections that can make your life impossible in ways you can't imagine." Madison laughed a sound that chilled. "Victor, more than any threat could have, Mr. Steinberg. In the past 4 hours, I've provided evidence to federal investigators that will result in your arrest for multiple felonies. Your company's stock price is about to crater. Your political connections won't return your calls once they're associated with a criminal investigation. And your son's college acceptances are about to be revoked when universities discover his academic records are completely fraudulent." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "You're threatening to destroy my future, but I've already destroyed yours. The only question now is whether you want to make things worse by continuing to threaten federal witnesses." Victor hung up the phone and immediately called his legal team. Within minutes, his office was swarming with lawyers, crisis management specialists, and private investigators. But as they scrambled to develop damage control strategies, events were already spiraling beyond their control. At 5:47 p.m., The Wall Street Journal published its investigation online with the headline, "Silicon Valley Billionaire Built Empire on Stolen Technology and Fraud." The article detailed Victor's theft of the Neuralink dynamics algorithms, his deception of the grieving families, and the elaborate academic fraud that had manufactured Camden's credentials. By 6 p.m., Technocore stock had fallen 30% in after-hours trading. Federal agents had arrived at Victor's office with search warrants, and Camden Steinberg was sitting in his BMW in the Blackwood parking lot, reading the news coverage on his phone with growing horror. Camden's first instinct was denial. The story had to be fake news, a coordinated attack by competitors jealous of his family's success. But as he read the detailed evidence, saw the photographs of documents, recognized his own handwriting in the homework assignments that proved his academic failures, reality began to penetrate his protective bubble of privilege. His phone buzzed with text messages from friends who'd seen the story. Blake Morrison, "Dude, is this real?" Sophia Chen, "My dad's asking if our family should distance ourselves from yours." Marcus Webb, "My father says you need to hire criminal defense lawyers immediately." Camden tried calling his father, but Victor's phone went straight to voicemail. He tried the house, but even Elena, who should have been preparing dinner, didn't answer. For the first time in his life, Camden Steinberg was completely alone with the consequences of his actions. At Blackwood, word spread with the velocity that only private school gossip could achieve. By evening, every student, teacher, and administrator knew that Camden's entire identity was a carefully constructed lie. His academic achievements, his college prospects, his family's wealth, everything that had made him untouchable was revealed as fraud. Principal Henderson received calls from 3 universities requesting immediate clarification of Camden's academic records. When she pulled his real transcripts, the ones Alina had photographed, she realized that Blackwood itself had been complicit in the deception through years of grade inflation and donated grades. Dr. Henderson made a decision that would define her legacy as an educator. She called an emergency meeting of the school board for the following morning, where she would recommend Camden's immediate expulsion and a full audit of academic records for all students whose families were major donors. Meanwhile, Madison sat in her small bedroom, watching news coverage of the story she had set in motion. CNN had picked up the investigation. Financial networks were analyzing Technocore's collapse. Legal experts were discussing potential criminal penalties. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Camden's number. Madison answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello, Camden?" "You destroyed my family." His voice was raw, stripped of its usual confidence and cruelty. "No," Madison replied calmly. "I exposed your family. Your father destroyed it 12 years ago when he chose to build his fortune on stolen technology and fraud. You destroyed it when you chose to use that stolen wealth to hurt people who had done nothing to deserve it. Do you have any idea what you've done? My college acceptances will be revoked. My father could go to prison. Our entire life is over." Madison felt no satisfaction in his pain, but she felt no sympathy either. "Camden, do you remember what you said to me at lunch that first week? You told me that gratitude was about understanding my place, knowing that I was only at Blackwood because your family felt sorry for me." She paused, making sure he was listening. "I want you to understand something now. You were never at Blackwood because you earned it. You were never qualified for the colleges that accepted you. You never deserved the wealth and privilege you used as weapons against people who had actually worked for their achievements. Everything you thought made you superior was built on lies." Camden was crying nodily, desperate sobs that would have embarrassed him if anyone else could hear. "I'll make this right," he said. "I'll tell everyone the truth about what I did to you. I'll apologize publicly. Just please, call off the investigation." "My father can make restitution, Camden," Madison interrupted gently. "This was never about apologizing or making restitution. This was about consequences. Real consequences for real actions. You spent months trying to teach me that I didn't belong in your world. Congratulations, you've succeeded. I don't belong in a world built on fraud, theft, and cruelty." She hung up the phone and returned to her homework. Tomorrow, she would begin her real education in justice, integrity, and the kind of power that couldn't be bought or stolen. Camden Steinberg's education and consequences had only just begun. 6 months later, Madison Cross stood on the MIT campus for her accepted students' day, wearing her grandmother's simple gold earrings and a smile that held no trace of the girl who had once eaten lunch alone at Blackwood Preparatory Academy. The irony wasn't lost on her while Camden had tried to sabotage her college prospects. Her genuine achievements had ultimately secured her admission to her dream school. The events following her exposure of the Steinberg family had unfolded with devastating efficiency. Victor Steinberg's arrest on November 12th made front-page news across the country. Federal agents had executed simultaneous raids on Technocore headquarters, Steinberg Mansion, and offshore banking partners. The $2 billion transfer scheduled for Camden's birthday never happened. The funds were frozen, as evidence in what prosecutors called one of the largest corporate fraud cases in Silicon Valley history. Camden's college acceptances were revoked within 48 hours of the story breaking. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, every elite institution that had admitted him based on fraudulent test scores and falsified transcripts sent formal letters withdrawing their offers. The humiliation was complete and public, covered by every major news outlet as an example of privilege buying access to opportunities that belonged to genuinely qualified students. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source: the families who had been defrauded 12 years earlier. Survivors of the Neuralink Dynamics founders filed a massive civil lawsuit, seeking damages that exceeded the Steinberg family's entire fortune. The case was strengthened by Elena's documentation, which proved premeditation and systematic deception rather than opportunistic business dealing. Victor's legal team managed to negotiate a plea bargain that spared him life in prison, but the terms were crushing. 8 years in federal prison, complete forfeiture of all assets derived from the stolen technology, and permanent prohibition from serving as an officer in any publicly traded company. Technocore was dissolved, its assets sold to pay restitution to victims. Camden found himself in a position he'd never imagined possible. Genuinely broke. The family mansion was seized by federal marshals. The luxury cars were auctioned. The offshore accounts that should have been his inheritance became evidence in criminal proceedings. At 18 years old, Camden Steinberg had to apply for financial aid just to attend community college. The psychological impact proved even more severe than the financial consequences. Camden had built his entire identity around superiority derived from wealth and privilege. Without those artificial advantages, he discovered he had no genuine skills, no real friends, and no ability to navigate the world that most people inhabited by necessity. His former circle at Blackwood abandoned him with the ruthless efficiency that only the truly wealthy could muster. Blake Morrison transferred to a boarding school in Switzerland to escape association with the scandal. Sophia Chen's family publicly distanced themselves from any connection to the Steinbergs. Marcus Webb's father, the federal judge, made statements about the importance of prosecuting fraud, regardless of the perpetrator's social status. Camden attempted suicide twice during his first semester at Valley Community College. The attempts were more cries for help than genuine efforts at self-destruction, but they revealed the depth of his psychological collapse. He entered therapy with a court-appointed counselor who specialized in helping people adjust to dramatic reversals of fortune. Meanwhile, Madison thrived in ways that surprised even her. Her story, the Maid's daughter who brought down a billionaire through courage and evidence, became a symbol of justice that resonated far beyond Silicon Valley. She received scholarship offers from dozens of organizations, interview requests from major media outlets, and invitations to speak at conferences about corporate accountability. But Madison handled her newfound attention with the same methodical intelligence that had exposed the Steinberg fraud. She accepted only opportunities that advanced her education or helped other students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Her focus remained on cybersecurity studies, where her real-world experience with digital investigation given her insights that impressed even graduate-level professors. Elena Cross experienced her own transformation. The evidence she had provided to prosecutors made her a protected federal witness, but it also made her unemployable in Silicon Valley's insular domestic worker network. Instead of seeing this as a setback, Alina used her newfound notoriety to launch a consulting business helping other domestic workers document workplace violations and potential crimes they witnessed. Her client base grew rapidly as word spread through immigrant communities about the woman who had brought down one of the most powerful families in California. Alina discovered that her years of invisible observation had given her skills that were valuable in the legitimate economy: attention to detail, discretion, and an understanding of how wealthy families actually operated behind closed doors. The legal proceedings against Victor Steinberg concluded with consequences that rippled through Silicon Valley's startup ecosystem. The case prompted congressional hearings about academic fraud in elite college admissions, leading to stricter verification requirements for standardized test scores and high school transcripts. Several other tech executives found themselves under investigation, as prosecutors used the Steinberg case as a template for identifying similar fraud patterns. Camden's attempts to rebuild his life proved more challenging than he'd anticipated. Community college courses that should have been simple review became genuine struggles. For someone whose educational foundation was entirely fraudulent, his classmates, many of them working multiple jobs to afford tuition, had little sympathy for his adjustment. Difficulties, the most painful aspect of Camden's new reality, was the complete absence of the deference he'd always expected. Professors didn't care about his family name or previous connections. Employers weren't impressed by his Blackwood diploma once they realized his actual qualifications. He had to learn, for the first time in his life, to succeed based purely on effort and ability. During his second year at community college, Camden wrote a letter to Madison. It was the 14th draft. The previous 13 had been destroyed as too self-pitying, too manipulative, or too focused on his own suffering rather than acknowledging the harm he had caused. The final letter was simple. Madison, I know I have no right to expect forgiveness or even a response. I want you to know that I understand now what I did to you and why it was wrong. I hope you achieve everything you've worked for, because unlike me, you actually earned it. I'm sorry. Madison never responded to the letter, but she kept it in her desk drawer as a reminder of how completely circumstances could change. The boy who had once wielded his family's wealth as a weapon against her was now struggling with basic algebra at a community college, while she studied advanced cryptography at one of the world's most prestigious universities. 3 years later, Madison graduated summa cum laude from MIT with a double major in computer science and cybersecurity. Her senior thesis on detecting financial fraud through digital forensics was published in an academic journal and cited by federal investigators working on white-collar crime cases. Camden, meanwhile, had transferred to a state university where he was slowly working toward a business degree. His grades were mediocre, his social life was non-existent, and his future prospects were uncertain. He worked nights at a restaurant to pay for tuition and lived in a studio apartment that would have horrified his former self. But something unexpected had happened during Camden's fall from grace. Stripped of artificial advantages and forced to confront genuine challenges, he had begun to develop actual character. The arrogance and cruelty that had defined his personality at Blackwood had been replaced by humility and a grudging respect for people who succeeded through merit rather than privilege. He would never be wealthy again. He would never attend an elite university or move in exclusive social circles. But for the first time in his life, Camden Steinberg was becoming a genuinely decent human being, a transformation that his billions in inheritance could never have purchased. Madison's response to bullying had indeed cost Camden his $2 billion inheritance, but it had also given him something far more valuable: the opportunity to discover who he could become when he had to earn everything he received. The Maid's daughter had taught the billionaire's son the most expensive lesson of his life: that true worth cannot be bought, stolen, or inherited. It can only be earned through character, integrity, and the courage to do what's right, even when the cost seems impossibly high. In the end, justice had been served in the most perfect way possible. Madison had gained a future built on her own achievements, while Camden had lost everything he'd never deserved, but gained the chance to build something real. Sometimes the best revenge is simply allowing people to face the natural consequences of their choices. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.